All right. Bit of a break because of scheduling, but here we are all back together again. I do think, so Michelle, you wouldn't have seen this, but yesterday one of our students took a picture of us, like a group picture of us all working around, and it definitely looks like a band, like a cover photo. Like one of them is definitely a cover photo. Especially like the one where we're sitting there with like our arms crossed and Bryce is leaning up against a wall in the back there like this. And it's definitely like a, yeah, there's something there. All right. Michelle, you are the first box in my set of squares. What do you got?
Well, I didn't hear back from Thomas yesterday. Y'all were supposed to have a meeting, I think. So I don't know if that happened. Or
yeah.
what.
So we had, so to loop you in, we had a bunch of meetings actually. So he had a meeting with his supervisor. Then we had our fellow meeting on Thursday. And I had a meeting with his supervisor as well. And Quentin and I got a chance to talk. And so basically, I'm gonna try to sort of run interference with the client, which in this case is his supervisor, as far as sort of like expectations about things, and then maybe do a little project management. But Quentin's gonna take lead with some engineering work, and then Tommy's gonna do some research on basically acting as a conduit of subject matter expert into the system. So he's going to do some workflow mapping and stuff. The main thing is that there is a layer on top of the just filling out the form that the client is very intent upon for safety reasons, which is that
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The client, so Professor Boonin. So the problem being that a guardianship, obviously, it's giving someone the right to make decisions for other people, and so if done sort of
carelessly
in haste, yeah, it ends up taking someone's rights away when that's not the appropriate action. So there's a whole set of questions and considerations to determine whether or not guardianship is the appropriate thing that someone wants to do in a situation. So Tommy's going to help map out some of the thinking around that and almost build like a screening module to intermediate whether or not people get to the final form. And then you and Quentin can, coordinate and work on fleshing out any of that final form, although Quentin has expressed he has some time he can spend on that. And then the other thing, which is new based upon meeting I had with Sarah yesterday, subsequent to the meeting we all had together, Quentin, was this is what happens when you commute with your supervisor. You could have multiple meetings a day. So on the home commute, we got to talk about, it really is, yes, it's this, there's the threshold question of whether or not it's appropriate, but then there's a question of if it is appropriate, what are the appropriate limitations? So although we had talked about Tommy doing something that would sort of sit on top, there will be a thread that needs to run through the filling out as it relates to flagging the limitations of the guardianship.
That makes sense, and that's good actually, because that gives Tommy more like meat to work on.
Okay.
So that's
he wants to get into the coding too, he said, but it's just so big that I feel like it would be a frustrating experience if he just was doing coding without any help. So.
That's what, yeah. So when we met the other day, he and I subsequently watched the video of their discussion about kind of what they wanted out of it. I'm just looking at it and I'm like,
we tried to rein back in some of those expectations and move
but
away from the waterfall model.
Even if they weren't, looking to be cautious, say they were just looking to put the PDF online with Thomas as
if he was the only one
that
was not,
seemed a little of an unreasonable scope, which is why I brought up those concerns. And I'm sorry if I didn't know exactly how to communicate that.
No, that's fine. But yeah, Quentin's gonna step in and do some relief batting, relief pitching, relief something. I don't know baseball well enough to know if I'm being a metaphor right.
relieving, he will relieve. Sure. Okay.
But that means you're welcome to continue working that role too. But there's now, Quentin's got a good chunk of time and a good connection with things, and can probably do. So I would coordinate with Quentin about technical stuff.
Sure.
But you can still. But what will likely happen is that we'll carve out stuff for Tommy, and if you want to keep working with Tommy on questions, that seems like maybe a good match. I know you had expressed an interest in working with someone.
Yeah, that would be good. That would
A
definitely.
really concrete thing is the screener, which we realize we don't know if it's big or small yet. Like how that threshold question, like should you file for a restraining order for the guardianship? I mean, but that's like a really concrete thing that could be developed totally independently.
Okay.
Then so we wouldn't like be stomping on each other's toes, for sure.
Yeah, and I think what'll happen is the screener will probably have a top layer that can be independent, and then like a big tendril that runs through as it deals with the limitations.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but you can start with the independent part.
Sure.
So I'm gonna keep iterating to just get it so that like at first glance, without knowing about what the limitation should be, that it makes sense as like an experience for someone to sit down and answer it, because it's quite long. I think that will take some time, but there's a lot that I think I could do, just rearranging some of the questions and breaking them up a bit. So,
sure.
I know teaching is intended to do.
So that was the start of your reporting, and it ended with us doing a bunch of reporting. So what more do you have anything more?
That's really what I wanted to find out today. So that's good. Thanks. Cool. Next.
Bryce. I know what's on your plate.
Yeah. So we have sent out to Tyler for asking off to be certified yesterday. Actually, we were planning on doing it Wednesday, but as I was trying to get everything together, ran into a weird error on the testing server that I just couldn't install the most up-to-date package, and so I had to have Quentin help me on that. But anyway, that's all in, and sent an email yesterday, and they responded quickly. Later, yes,
Very
I think
quickly.
like late yesterday, just before right after I guess I got off and was not looking at my email for the night. They essentially said like, oh, like, do y'all want to meet and talk about it? And with a I don't know how to describe, but it's just everything makes me nervous now. But yeah,
Just breathe, Bryce. Just breathe.
But either way, they were just like reached out, just like, oh, like further discuss some aspects of the cert and general business use cases. And so I am, yeah. And so that was like most of my work this week was getting ready for that. Yesterday, I was able to get a quick like read all of the text in a DocAssembly interview and get a readability for it, as opposed to just one page at a time. And that was my one break from Tyler. And now I'm back on Tyler, just trying to do some last minute polishes, make sure there's nothing that will get in the way, so we can at least do this demo for them and see how it goes. But yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna meet with him at 3 today. Is that the time we booked?
That is the time.
Cool. And yeah, cool. Quentin, I've been seeing lots of documentation stuff.
Yeah, so like one of our big deliverables is this idea of the linter, which Bryce actually is working on. And I think the supporting thing we need there is to get our style guide to know what we want to lint, what we want to think, what is the right way to write stuff, both in terms of code and in terms of actual substantive content. So that's what I've been working on. Let me see, I'll pull up a couple of things here to share if we have time, which I think hopefully we
Yeah,
do.
we do.
So, another window, so it's not showing my email and such. So this is, I think, one of the first things I was like, hey, you know, just communication wise, we could do a better job communicating what our project is. And an easy way to do that is on our website. So I made this landing page, which is basically just I subbed in our content for the DocUSource landing page. Be nice for us to copy over our styles from Court Forms Online and carry those over through, so that like we had the dark blue header and I think the logo should appear there. Should be an easy way for us to get the logo. This one here, there. And just I made some. This is interesting how it shows up with the icons not filling up the space on the right. I'm not sure why that is. I'm just using the same styles as DocUSource there again.
I have that style
Want it
behavior
low,
too.
obviously, and you fill the whole room if you have a wide screen like I have. And then this view our work. CTA just goes right to Court Forms Online and then get started. Takes you to the docs page we already had. So I changed this page too, which is just like a chance for us to be more detailed about what we do compared to the landing page. I just tried to think about like what are the things we've emphasized in the paper that we wrote and all of our presentations as being the key things we've done, and then summarize the tools we're building, like by feature, not by the names that we're using for them really, and then the features of our forms. I thought it'd be really nice for us to have some annotated screenshots here at this point. People to get a sense of like, hey, what is it? What's the advantage of using assembly line versus vanilla DocAssemble? What do you get out of the box, essentially? And then I've like just really thought about how to reorganize all the great content we had from the style guide already, which was kind of mixed together and didn't have an order that made it was easy to access, I think, and broke it into more pages. So coding style guide was really underdeveloped, added a lot of content here, but some of it did come from what we'd already talked about in our Word doc, and then some of it had already been added to the DocUSource page. So it was mostly just reorganizing about a quarter of it. A lot of it's new. And then
did you change any of the content? I know there was a bit we were discussing. Okay.
Yep. So some of the content made sense, is written, some of it didn't. Took a lot of inspiration from the UK and Australian style guides where they overlapped. Their own style manuals for web form design, I think, were really good. And I used that as a big inspiration for how to organize, like break it up into different pages. So people can feel free to like keep iterating on this and making suggestions on things where I didn't get things right. But a lot of it is just as is, with some clarifications.
I realized that's your local implementation because I'm like, wait, I didn't see the question library section yet. And I'm like,
well, yeah, that's the main thing I want to demo. This is more just an overview, but here I actually have some more questions. So been thinking about, we have this idea, we're going to deliver a question library to folks. And I was like, there's all these cool technical ways maybe we could do it. But I think the lowest common denominator is just a web page where we list out our questions. So that's what I've been thinking about and what that should look like. So while it would be nice for someone designing a form that's going to be a paper form to be able to do it inside Microsoft Word or Acrobat or InDesign, whatever tool they might think is the best perfect tool to use to do it, and then also like have the vetted question components. It doesn't seem like that's a really realistic or helpful place for us to invest time based on some discussions that I, thought I did after like asking about people's advice on Twitter, essentially. But I think I agree with it. And I think that the best we can really do is focus on optimizing for DocAssemble interviews and specifically in the Weaver. And then the other part is having a static web page where people from any tool that they choose can observe our questions and see how we've written them and then hopefully benefit from those. So this is what I've been working on a little bit today. I think I'd love some insight on like how to write out the questions in a usable way for people that's cross-platform. This is one approach, just putting in a quote block. And then I think having the code snippets here. So obviously assembly line and vanilla DocAssemble, and then I just put a preview image here of what the question looks like.
I like that.
So that's one approach. And then I tried to just think about the rules that we thought about for variations.
Oh, I see. I see someone just coming home. Yeah, you.
They're basically the same thing. So we had a lot of discussions about these. Some of them are on GitHub. One question is like, where should we maybe link to some of the threads where we discussed these topics? How helpful is the preview image? What other ways we want to let people absorb the information if they're not using DocAssemble, rather than having to try to scan it from the code? They don't understand the code probably.
Well, I think the preview can take the place of maybe not take the place of, but if you want to show a person what it would look like, that to me is more useful than some text.
The main thought I had there was that this wouldn't be accessible and you couldn't copy and paste it from the image.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering how hard it would be to, we wouldn't be able to get the styles exactly right, probably, and how it is on DocAssemble.
Iframe or something.
But we could just make the form elements in the page, right? Do we have that? Because Markdown can just have a HTML in it. I don't know if it seems like we might get caught in a lot of nitty gritty stuff of trying to make it exactly like DocAssemble does. And
you just do an iframe. You just do an iframe with a one question, just the names.
I mean, I could also link people to our server, but that's another question. We want to have people, do we want to expose our public server to the web? So these examples, they right now come from the AL recipes. So they're actual YAML files that we already have. That are runnable examples. But do we want to link to those publicly? I'm not sure.
Yeah, what is it? The DocAssemble documentation does something similar, where I think Jonathan just has a DocAssemble test server that has when you click on the preview image, it just brings you straight to that web page, which is just an interview with one question, with the one example question it's trying to demonstrate.
Exactly, yeah. And it's the same thing that you do from the playground if you use the. So I don't know if people have ideas. So right now, I think we only have maybe 5 to 10 model questions, at least by topic. So think of names, addresses, contact information, some stuff around courts. Might do some specific examples around lists, asking for children might be a specific example. One
thing I know I would like from the use case I've been thinking about is if you could jump into these based upon providing one of the subfields. So if I had a URL where I could just say name or some standard just field identifier, and then it would show me the grouping that field was in. I'm thinking about on the Form Explorer.
Applicable to first name, middle name.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about from the Form Explorer where it shows you the fields that that have been discovered. Once those become normalized fields, it'd be nice if you could link to them, and then it took us to our question library.
Would the grouping be enough though for something like a name? Or
I think a grouping would be enough, but we won't necessarily discover it by the grouping because the people who have originally done the form may not have, right? We'll only know at the field level.
So we could probably solve that by just adding manual anchors for those, for each field.
I think that probably could happen.
Take people to the group for the name. Most of these fields are going to be like this probably. But I'd be interested, once you start to do that, we'll probably discover a lot more about what are names that are fields that are asked on a lot of interviews, and we really should standardize all of those. But yeah, actually, that's really interesting because I think the unit of measurement I've been thinking of is questions, not fields. But we could probably think of fields that are used in more than one question. So that will be hard to figure out. But I don't know if someone's browsing the documentation of thinking of labels is the right quanta, right?
No, I think it's a discoverability thing. I think you want to be able to search by them. I don't think it makes much sense if you're browsing. But it's it's the difference between the atomic and the molecular in our analogy from another conversation.
Yeah. Well, that makes
Michelle,
me think that it's really important to have searchable text here with the not just
Yeah.
the
I think I
visible
know.
label, but a standard field name probably, right? So like we would have something like the label from the labeling guidelines.
That's what I think would be ideal, because that is what the normalized fields would present as.
So that's actually another place where I did a ton of reorganization, actually. So I think it's more accessible, but if people have feedback, they should provide it. That's a good point. So this is the labeling section here. And it really should line up with questions, shouldn't it? In some way. But what do you think? I guess here I could just do a cross-reference to the main question.
Yeah.
But this might be where you want to link, actually.
Yeah, as long as you link, I mean, you could link here, and then as long as there's a cross-reference back to the other, so you can get to it. But I imagine we'll be pulling out fields, but the thing we'll be pulling out are the standardized field names. I mean, that's what we'll try to produce, the standardized field names. So that's the thing we'll have. I mean, we could do a mapping and then link to another thing, but I think it would just be nice if we had some place for the standardized field name to point someone at.
That probably should be this page, I guess, but this is like really small right now relative to the whole universe of labels people should use, because we don't have built-in questions for every kind of field. But maybe that means we should expand our built-in questions to cover more of those use cases. That is really interesting. I always find when I'm writing documentation, like, I'm documenting this thing that now suddenly I want to have the thing to working backwards from the documentation to the need is actually something I've been starting to think about. Test-driven development, I guess, documentation-driven coding, maybe. Not sure. Well, yeah.
They
So
definitely feed on each other. So yeah.
That label idea is a great one. So cross-linking the labels and the references to the questions that they would go in. Big gap there is like, where do we want to list all of the labels that are possible? Should those go on the Weaver labeling guidelines page or on a different page that's bigger? And this is going to be just a subset. Probably could.
We had, so that the original one was supposed to be a reference page instead of the explanation page. That was supposed to be a here are all the labels.
Well, this is all of the labels still. The difference is that I just tried to make it so that you could find them a little bit more easily by grouping them by the topic.
Mm-hmm.
It still has the same list of labels, or it's still here. It's just rearranged. So we never ended up writing the reference page. That was more like how to, but I think it was right to start with just like, here's the list, but I don't think it was ended up being very easy for people to access the way that it was originally written, which makes sense. That was like our MVP.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
But I thought that's what you were describing right now. Are you describing something different?
What I'm describing now is, I don't know. It depends a lot on what David finds when he's looking at fields and like figuring out like, because what we don't want to standardize a field that's only used once in the whole universe of fields. But if there are new fields that come up, how many are there? Is it like 100? Is it like 5 or 10? If it's 100, we might decide they don't fit on this page. If it's 10, we're like, oh, we should really standardize those and have questions for them too. So it's a different conversation depending on what we learn.
Right, and we'll also get a sense for how prevalent certain fields are, which will be useful. Like if there's fields that every form uses, then yes, we want to standardize those. So we could do a cutoff. Like, let's see if we can standardize fields that are used in the 80% of all forms.
Actually, you should pull in the Massachusetts forms that we labeled, because it's a lot more than the ones that are in live production interviews.
Yeah, that's a good point.
and it's going to be they're going to be much more helpful than the ones that are just the Massachusetts forms that don't have any labeling. So,
Actually, that'll be like the, yeah, I should pull those in. The thing is it's not, what I need is I need the before and after, and there we just sort of have the after. What I need is the forms with the sort of auto-assigned names and the forms with the labeled. So I'm either going to have to take the ones we've labeled.
Two different data training sets, you're saying?
Yeah, I need them for training purposes. So I either need to reproduce what the automatic ones would have been for the ones we already have labeled, or label ones that have already been automatically labeled.
They might have auto labels. I think we tried to link to the original, but I don't know if a lot of them had labels at all in Massachusetts.
A surprisingly large number of them now do. I was looking at them this recently. So if they're actually the same forms, just someone went through and labeled and made fields, then we might be able to get something out of that. I'll have to look into that.
Well,
I
it's good
wanted
transition. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
to cover real fast. Well, one, it's looking awesome. Documentation, good stuff. I just want the way that it presents, kind of go from a PDF to a form really quickly, I think is a bit misrepresentative of the experience. And I think does not adequately prepare a person for the amount of work they're going to have to do.
That's a good question. Yeah, how to represent what we're doing. So I was very careful to use the word runnable prototype. And I can confirm, like having done the exercise in class really a lot, that you can get from a runnable prototype to from a labeled PDF.
The first
quickly.
line on the about page was like, make it a beautiful form or something. That's the first line. The prototype, runnable prototype, is the second line. So, and the first page doesn't say make a form prototype with ease, right? It says make a form with ease. And I think there's a substantial difference. Just like as a user, if I were to find this page and then go, oh, thank goodness, and then use it and have the result, I would be disappointed and overwhelmed, and it would not be a good experience. So it's not something I would come back to, right?
Yeah, I would think we have to think about how to frame that. Yeah, but I also don't want to add too many weasel words. So I don't think those are communicative either for people.
I think there's something to be said for having a catchy headline that draws people in, and then having a clarification. I mean, you don't get far before you realize prototype, right? Like if the issue is you have to read the whole page before you know what it does, I don't think that's a problem. I think that it becomes a problem if it's like, oh, I think this is this, and then I install this stuff and I do this stuff, and then I find out there's like if the ball is hidden. Also, I think a helpful thing to think about, Michelle, is the work that we're just starting to do, which we sort of gave you the like overview of like the 5 things we're delivering, and all of that moves towards wanting to improve that workflow, to make it.
Then have that description when the workflow is over and confirmed, right? Like have it once it's there.
Yeah, no, I'm just giving you context. And I say, but I also don't think it's being disingenuous to on the second line say this will make a prototype. I understand your concern.
I'm not saying it's disingenuous. I'm saying that the expectations that I would have looking at that site is not what I would have gotten, right?
Yeah.
So that's all. It's not about being disingenuous. It's about setting expectations.
No, and I point is taken.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think we have to just decide like where expectations are set as well. So if we say something that's inaccurate, I think that's a problem. But if we have a marketing statement, it doesn't necessarily. There's a lot of work that's being done with ease. So I would say that we've made it much simpler and faster for someone to do it. So I do think that's 100% accurate. something I'm seeing that's on there now. It says in no time. I could take that out and probably should. But if you look at where I got the inspiration for that, produce interviews with ease, go to the Docusaurus page. It almost uses the exact same phrasing. It's like, we know how hard it is to write a Docusaurus site. Well, it just says quickly. But,
Yeah, but I also didn't appreciate that. So I guess there you go. Same user, same experience. I don't know.
I wouldn't overgeneralize it. That's all. I think, if you're being clear in the documentation about like what the process actually is, I think it's okay to explain what your marketing proposition is, which is we make it easier for people to make websites that got it interviews.
We could keep discussing this forever, but I think I've presented my experience, what my experience would be, and that's
all right.
What I'd hope to express.
Noted. All right, so that was Quinn and Chicken. You said that was probably a good segue into maybe sharing the Form Explorer. Was that where you were?
That's what I was thinking.
Let's see. Now I have to find. Oh. Okay, so we'll go to that. So here is a little more than a wireframe, very rough prototype for the Form Explorer, which Michelle, you'll remember, is one of the 5 things that we're looking to deliver. Right now, it's just a bunch of lorem ipsum on this page, but basically we've got a way to, so a description of what's going on, what the Form Explorer is, then an ability to navigate the relationship between forms based upon commonality. So here we have a graph. This is just like a 30 or so forms loaded in. Unfortunately, the tool I'm using, if once I get to the sizes that we're dealing with, actually doesn't create a nice rendering for the web, which is a shame because one creates really nice web renderings at low numbers. But I know some other tools. So this is just to give you an idea. And so basically, we've modeled each of the a common field between forms is a link between forms. So the more common fields they have, the more links in the network. But so there's some way to explore. So what's basically going on here, just to step back, because
do you exclude things like name, birth date, and that kind of thing?
Not yet. Right now, this is all. This isn't even. It's using the form fields that are there already, which are just the ones that are automatically put there by Adobe for Michigan. So it's not. We're not at the level yet where we're thinking about exactly what's going on there. But we actually might want to include things, commonly used ones, and just be able to identify outliers to those common ones, because then that would help us identify, for example, what are all the questions and fields you need to make sure you definitely handle. You definitely need to handle name, address, etc. You actually can start to see at higher numbers, you can actually start to see some structure of groupings of types of forms, like clusters of forms based on this. So that's actually, I think I have here on. I have here's a grouping, for example, at a larger number where you can actually see some at least 2 distinct clusters in the subset I was working with. But anyhow, so this is just the idea is the Form Explorer will have one way to explore sort of the interrelationship of the fields. That's for this level. It'll have ability to look at the flow. This, however, requires that we have actually filled out forms. And this will be about the workflow that a form, or the workflow that a matter goes through in the story told by the forms that were used in it. So, this form was filled out first, then this form, then one of these 2 forms. We can look at that at a flow level. And then here's just a list. And so what we've done now is we've loaded in the PDF forms for Michigan and Utah, and used the metadata available on the website to group them in the same groupings that they have on their website. So here's adoption court forms, for example. And then you can zoom in to look at the forms in detail. Eventually, this form here will be our annotated forms, or our form with the normalized field names. But right now, all it's doing is we have the Michigan forms are nice. If someone's gone through already put fields there, they have just sort of like the field names that come from the related text from the nearby text that you get when you do an automated form field creation. So which is to say that the field names now don't contain the information we want them to contain. But just in the rapid prototyping phase here. So we have the title of the form, and then some information about the form, where it was sourced, when it was sourced, number of pages. It really should probably be number of fields as opposed to questions, because sometimes fields aren't questions, but average number, reading level. We have a lot of discussion about what that means or whether or not it should be useful, but right now this is just an example. Type of form, this right now is static. I realize it's not actually pulling the data that we do have. And then these are all the identified fields in the form. And as you can see, these identified fields are really just the adjacent text to the fields. So not containing a lot of information. But it's enough for us to start comparing forms and start to build what some of those tools would look like. So for example, you can see similar forms, which are forms that share, a certain percentage of fields. So we can see, here, this other one, which oddly enough is just the same form again, just without the instructions. Like there's one with the instructions and without instructions, and they share almost all the same fields. Not surprising. But you can also see like 14% of fields are shared with this form here. And so you can start to see similar fields. And then here's a prompt to how do you take our annotated form and then put it through the Weaver. The idea being that we can create these form sets. So all this is sort of automatically created, although there's some fine tuning that goes to like the graph presentation and stuff. But everything else is automatically created just based upon the downloaded forms. And so you get that context and a little bit of ability to sort of search and go through. And this is where we were talking about once these start getting resolved to normalize field names, it would be nice to be able to click on this and then go to, say, the documentation page on that field, and then see the appropriate context there to help you think about
that
whether or not.
explains a lot about that conversation.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So that's that there. So the next stages are really to build a tool that takes a shot at trying to normalize these field names into the standardized field names. And that was the conversation Quentin and I were talking about with data sources, because we're going to try an ML solution. So we need some training data, which basically means we need forms with their sort of native default named fields and expert labeled fields. And I don't suspect there's enough signal in just the field name to be able to specify the normalized field name. So we're also going to be feeding in context about the type of field and the previous fields in the form.
Are y'all thinking of doing yeah, I couldn't tell from your discussion earlier if you felt it was sufficient, whatever it was you were planning, but it could possibly be a summer project like we did, like closer to the original year, where like students, fellows, like got the form that had the fields, saved those,
did labeling, yeah,
labeled it, and then like a more advanced, someone with more experience would go over and make sure that they were, labeled correctly. And then
at some point we'll need to do some hand labeling, and so what resources we bring to bear on that are an open question, but likely will involve students at some point. But yeah, so that's just that, and where we're at. What's nice is that now there's a site that's generated automatically that once I for example, if I magically made a normalizer that could actually normalize these into set fields, then actually the information that you glean from common shared fields and the information you glean from similar forms would start to increase in its utility. So the skeleton's there, it's just building the fleshing it out and moving that forward. The end goal here is basically to allow people to be able to get a feel for their existing forms, how they're interrelated, and then take those forms they want to, if they want to, and then just have them prepared such that they'd be ready to put through the Weaver. And so the idea is to do that at something at a larger scale than what we did over the summer. So yeah, eventually you would automate a large part of what those student tasks were, of finding the forms, tracking them down, doing the labeling. But of course, as I always like to say, we don't expect it to be magical fairy AI dust that magically does it all. The point is, if you can get, 80, 60, 50% of the work done automatically, that's still a win, because it moves you closer to the end. Yeah, so that was that. I don't know if there were any questions, but that was my stuff. And Quentin and I already had a good back and forth on a bunch of stuff in the teams, and we decided to have these conversations in the backend developer channel. So Michelle, you probably saw that there too.
Yeah, and to say again, it's looking really awesome. I think it's pretty cool to see how that visualization works. It gives it more shape, but I think it'll be really
it's nice to
interesting
actually put stuff in there. But yeah, now the key thing is being able to do the form normalization. If that goes easily, then it'll be super awesome. If that goes hard, which will be some moderate amount of hardness, I'm sure. The empirical question is, how much of it can we take care of, right? Can we only take care of 20%, or can we do something closer to 60 or 80%? And obviously it's more useful the more we can do. But it's still useful even if we only do a small part. It's just not as impressive.
It occurs to me that you're probably already thinking of this, but we can still say it out loud, which is be really helpful to be able to chunk the form fields on the screen to say, like, because the labels that I'm seeing it gave automatically, it's like yes, no, yes, number one, or no, number one. Those aren't very helpful, but there's probably a heading that goes with each one. So figuring out how to grab the heading and say these fields fall under this heading. Yeah,
I need to look at how they did it, although some of it might be not as structured as one would hope when looking at how they created them. So even though they've made, a lot of things are checkboxes. And so they're not necessarily, even though they might all be under a heading, I think the way they're stored, or at least the way I've been able to discover the storage, it doesn't necessarily have them grouped in any way. So you might be able to infer grouping based upon you have a bunch of checkboxes next to each other. So maybe that's one of the things we'll think about is, like, if you have a checkbox followed by another checkbox, group them together. But I'll have to build in those rules. But I think I'll start first with just looking at things that are clearly text fields, and then just take it one bite at a time. And then the question is, based upon how well we can get sort of our early versions of that working, then the question becomes, how do we facilitate that last mile problem of getting those last fields that aren't normalized into a normalized state? And does that just mean taking the Explorer sort of window we saw now and having that having a certain number of people to be able to do an editable edit to the fields? Do we build in a full-fledged editor like Documate has made, or some version like that? Is there another view or another tool that we need to build? But right now we're just focusing on the static Explorer.
And the other side of that is going to be like getting it to that pre-labeled state without having to use Adobe Acrobat too would be a nice.
Yeah, one step at a time. So right now, and this is all predicated upon forms that have fields. Although we've loaded in forms, like Utah doesn't have any fields. So you load them in and it still can tell you things like how many pages are in the PDF and that sort of stuff. And the reading level, because it can maybe pull out some text if there's some text there, but it doesn't have those fields. That'll be the next big thing. So I think we were sort of like starting in the middle of the workflow and working in both directions. So
yeah, no, that's good though, because obviously we could just run Acrobat. We talked about this before, but just like, we could just run Acrobat. Use some macro to run Acrobat on 1,000 forms. It's doable.
Yes, and that would probably be a good stopgap measure, actually, and might be useful for some of our training stuff. In fact, if we had that tool and we could do that on the forms that we already had, that would fill in the training data we need on the back end.
Wonder,
That being
like, what
said, we're
licensing restrictions there be for us to even do, just for an internal tool to like say, hey, upload your
yeah.
form. We'll run Acrobat on our server.
Yeah,
I have
that's
a
an
feeling
interesting
that's
question.
probably not permissible by the licensing terms, but
That would be my guess too.
there was a
Um,
commercial version of Acrobat for Linux, quite like, an older version. I don't think they're updating it, but
we'll figure it out as we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
yeah, of course.
I see people are jumping on and it's way after 1. So I'm sure they're probably here for casual, but before I stop the recording, I'll ask if anyone has anything they want to share on the record. Lisa or Michael. Or if you're
I
just
just put a
hanging out.
note in the, hi y'all, I did want to interrupt your discussion. I put a note in the chat queue, just saying that some of the forms that y'all are working on for Louisiana are moving forward. We had a discussion about the end product presentation and the state LSBA access to justice programs committee and commission and various subcommittees are, working with y'all's contacts at Lanyap to move that forward. I guess Amanda's
Cool.
done that with y'all just to do some, some polishing for end product and that kind of thing. But it sounds like everyone's very enthusiastic about the project, which is good.
It's always nice to hear it from someone who's not through our normal contacts, because then I put a different amount of weight on that. It's always nice to have independent verification. So it's very good to hear.
Yeah, no, some of these forms have existed in various formats for a long time, but the thing is that having the Supreme Court's buy-in now
Yes.
is really the
Yes.
critical piece. But there's going to have to be, and it seems like a significant amount of work to the actual presentation of the forms at the end of the program, the end product, to make it a better sell overall. But I know that that's doable because we've done that in the past, so we know that's it shouldn't be a major hurdle, and it's just part of the whole process because y'all are working with a new tool and that requires some additional time and attention. But you're just getting that kind of outsider's view of the discussion surrounding these, and that there is forward momentum, which I'm sure makes you all feel good
Yes,
about
I love to know that we're not just spinning our wheels. That's great. Anything else, Lisa or Michael, or I'll cut the recording and we can just chat.